Warning, the following video contains mature themes discussing the issues of child abuse, racism, and homophobia, and briefly depicts imagery that may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. The funny thing about progress is it only seems to happen when you aren't looking. Like a train that only moves forward when all the blinds are drawn. With no frame of reference, it can seem like you're standing still, or even moving backwards. And those feelings are valid. Hell, in the last 5 years alone, we've seen a reemergence of the flat earthers, the rise of QAnon, white nationalists marching openly in the streets, a pandemic of biblical proportions wiping out over 6 million people and resulting in worldwide shutdowns, coupled with an equally large infodemic of mass misinformation, inflating the ranks of the anti-vaxxers. We've seen a surge of Christian nationalists attempting to turn our nation into a theocracy. We have a war between the Ukraine and Russia, which is a nuclear power, runaway inflation, surging gas prices, homophobic pastors calling for the death penalty of members of the LGBT community, and in Florida, there's an attack on both free speech and gay rights with the Don't Say Gay bill, to the particular detriment of marginalized students. I could go on at length, but I don't want to exhaust you, and you've already seen it all firsthand or on the news. Afghanistan has fallen to the Taliban, and there are psychics, conspiracy theorists, and charlatans of all stripes all over TV. Climate change is out of control, and throughout the southern United States, reproductive rights are being stolen away from women. And that's mostly just stuff that affects the US, of which I'm barely scratching the surface. There's a lot of progress to be made, and when I just fixate on that, it's hard not to get overwhelmed, to feel like we're sinking back into the dark ages, and that any effort to push back is a futile pipe dream that only Sisyphus could be proud of. And yet, here's the irony. I don't think that anyone in their right mind who has a decent knowledge of history, if offered to go 100 years or more into the past, would take the offer. First, just look at the moral progress from the various rights revolutions from the last 200 years. Just in the US alone, if you're black, gay, trans, female, Jewish, Asian, or any religious or non-religious minority, I don't even have to breathe the words slavery, Jim Crow, chemical castration, women's suffrage, eugenics, internment camps, etc. You already know better than I do how bad things were and how far they've come. But even children, no matter what their sex or race, if they were lucky enough to be born free and not die in childbirth, often they killed their own moms as they broke free from the womb. If they were illegitimate, they bore the undeserved shame of being labeled bastards for life. It was both acceptable and commonplace for children to be worked to death in coal mines for starvation wages. They were often illiterate and were to be seen and not heard. Kids were essentially property of their parents, who could legally beat and abuse them into submission, marry them off to whomever they pleased, or send them to a monastery where they had absolutely no legal recourse against sexual abuse from priests. There were no child labor laws, child protective services, or even a remote understanding of child development or psychology. And even for the majority, for the white evangelical straight Christian male, life sucked, and then you died. There was no minimum wage or overtime pay. You were worked to the bone, suffered work injuries for which the primitive healthcare of the time had no solution. You often died on the job or were drafted into rich men's wars, and without antibiotics, a simple infection meant either amputation or death. Famine, drought, plague, and disease devastated the world at a scale we couldn't even imagine today. Go a little further back, and almost every nation on earth was authoritarian. Free speech, free press, freedom of assembly. Forget about it. How about some bedbugs, fleas, and rats instead? There were no laws against war crimes or torture, and the death penalty was so commonplace that the gallows and the guillotine were public forms of entertainment for the whole family. And if any of this trauma got to you and you developed PTSD, anxiety, depression, or any mental illness, you were simply labeled insane and wheeled off to an asylum. Have fun with that lobotomy. And even if you were one of the lucky ones, the nobility, the 0.1%. The luxuries we take for granted today were futuristic science fiction. 4-hour trip by plane, more like a month-long uncomfortable bumpy carriage ride on roads riddled with potholes and bandits. There was no air conditioning, just sweat. No water sanitation or fridges, so food molded quickly and you died of cholera or dysentery. And even if you had a harem to keep your mind off of your misery, there were no condoms, and unlike today where almost every STI has either a vaccine vaccine, cure, or treatment, back then your brain would simply rot from syphilis as you scratched away at your scabies. It's not just the expansion of voting rights or rapid technological progress and medical progress that's gotten us so far out of this pit of the past. It's the shift in our societal values, the increased amplitude of the voices of those suffering, the increased velocity of our ideological conversations. Just since I started my channel, I've seen a massive surge in the number of people who actually cite good scientific studies or who call people out for posting unsourced or poorly sourced pseudoscientific claims. I see more people who understand the value of the scientific process, peer review, clinical trials, with control groups, placebos, double blinding, etc. I see people who care about the truth more than about preserving dogmatic traditions. I see people learning epistemology, the study of knowledge and how we can reliably know anything. I've seen an expansion of LGBT rights and a global conversation about race and racism. I even see Gen Z talking openly and having productive conversations about mental health on TikTok in a way that was unheard of when I was growing up. All of this positive change is happening rapidly because we collectively focus our attention and our outrage on the outrageous, which makes it hard to see the progress because it's difficult to see the forest through the trees, to see the progress through the regress, for the simple reason that the only reason that the progress happens at all, or at least at this rate, is because we fixate on the problems, not simply get content with the strides that have already been made. They say that progress is 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but in order for the steps forward to occur at all, society has to focus disproportionately on the back steps, which gives us the illusion of regression. And yet, this is how society maintains forward motion, hence what I call the Backstep Paradox. In order for society to progress, it has to focus on the regression. When something outrageous or regressive happens, it's the response to this, the frustration and anger about the issue that lights a fire under us to do something about it, to improve society by pushing harder in the opposite direction. For a long time, I've called out the media's negativity bias. A horrific murder story is way more likely to make it to print than an uplifting charity story. If it bleeds, it leads. And an outrageous story is far more likely to trend on social media, generating a snowball of public rage. This negativity bias negatively shapes our perceptions, and if we're not careful, it can create a world of fear, paranoia, xenophobia, tribalism, and pessimism. This is particularly dangerous because we often form our views of the world and our decisions based not on reliable data, but on the prevalent information that immediately comes to mind. And horror stories easily come to mind. This mental shortcut, this cognitive bias that we all fall prey to, is called the availability heuristic. But if there is a silver lining to this negativity bias, it's the backstep paradox. It's a double-edged sword. Discontentment breeds innovation, but perpetual discontentment can be extremely depressing. Suffering and outrage are the catalysts of societal progress, but they too have their downsides. This is a problem that I found myself struggling with personally. We all care about multiple causes, but we each have a limited amount of time and energy and money, and it's so easy to get burned out, fixated on one or all of them. We have to prioritize the ones which mean the most to us personally and which we want to allocate our resources to, and if we're not careful, if we never take a step back to get perspective, to see how far we've come, we risk emotional exhaustion, depression, and outrage fatigue. If we don't take the time to breathe, to celebrate our victories, it's easy to lose hope, to give up, or burn out. I made a video a while back called Why Are Atheists So Angry? And in it, I went over a long list of horrible things that have been done because of religion or towards non-believers, and concluded with the statement that if we're angry, it's because we give a damn, because we believe that change can be made. That anger can be channeled and focused to make positive change. But if we're not careful, the very outrage that fuels us can become our undoing. Our spark can burn us into exhausted vapor. Our fire can shine bright or utterly burn us out. And the only way out of this trap is to take a step back, to gain perspective, to celebrate our victories, and return renewed to our cause, knowing that the world is progressing and that we all can be a part of it. If you found this video inspiring and like the work that I do, my videos will always be free for you, but Holy Kool-Aid is supported by viewers like you. If you want to say thanks and support my work, you can make a per video pledge on patreon.com/holykoolaid, a monthly donation through Subscribestar, or a one-time gift on PayPal. Thank you so much, and as always, dare to be curious, but don't drink the Kool-Aid.